talk about how to generate startup ideas, I've got one important topic to tell you about. These are 3 things that make your startup idea seem bad, but actually make them good. And the reason that they make them good is that most founders will shy away from ideas like these, which leaves them on the table for smarter founders to go and grab them. And here they are. Ideas that are hard to get started, ideas that are in a boring space, and ideas that have existing competitors. Ideas that are hard to get started. So Paul Graham wrote a terrific article about this called Schlep Blindness, which I'd really recommend reading. And the example that Paul discusses is Stripe. You all know Stripe. They make it easy to integrate credit card payments to your website. And the fascinating thing about Stripe is that when Stripe launched, there were thousands of developers who already knew that this was a problem. They had tried to integrate credit card payments to their site, and they realized that the existing options sucked. But strangely, not one of them even tried to start Stripe. And it's kind of a fascinating question why nobody else tried when so many people were in a perfect position to see this problem. And the reason is that getting started building Stripe required some things that seemed really hard. You had to get a special deal with a bank. You had to learn a lot about the nitty-gritty details of credit card infrastructure. Those things seemed so hard that they scared off all the other people who might have started Stripe, which caused them to leave this $100 billion opportunity on the table for the Stripe founders to go and pick up. Okay, the second one is ideas that are in a boring space. And a great example of this is Gusto, which makes payroll software. Payroll software. Pretty boring, right? But the thing is, there are thousands of people who must have realized that payroll software sucked. But because it was kind of a boring problem, nobody tried to fix it until the Gusto founders came along. And the thing is that because most founders shy away from ideas like this, boring ideas like payroll software have a much higher hit rate than fun ideas like apps to find new restaurants to eat at, or apps to find the next song to listen to, something like that. Fun ideas get picked over. Boring ideas get left on the table for a long time. Now, you might be thinking, Jared, why would I want to work on a boring idea? That sounds, boring. But here's the thing. Even if you work on an idea that sounds fun at the outset, the day-to-day reality of your startup is going to be mostly the same anyway. Either way, you'll be mostly writing code, fixing bugs, talking to users, pretty much the same stuff. And so I would argue that once the initial excitement of your idea has worn off, and you are 6 or 12 months in, and you are grinding out the execution that makes your idea actually work, how fun the initial idea sounded actually has little to no correlation with how much fun you will actually be having working on your company. And the last one is that founders incorrectly shy away from spaces where there are existing competitors. Counterintuitively, most good startup ideas have existing competitors. When founders go into spaces with no existing competitors, they often find out that the reason that there are no competitors is because no one wants the product. A great situation is actually a market where there are existing competitors, but you've noticed something that they all seem to have missed, or they all just kind of suck. A classic example of this is Dropbox. So when Dropbox launched, there were already about 20 cloud-based file storage companies. Dropbox was the 20th company in its space to launch. Naively, you might have thought that that made this a bad market. I mean, you would have gone and looked and said there are already 20 competitors. It seems like a bad market to go into. But if you were savvy about startup ideas, you would have realized that it actually made it a great market. And the reason is that even though there were 20 companies doing this, most people didn't use any of them. And that strongly suggests that there actually was a problem here, but the existing products hadn't solved it. And Drew, the founder of Dropbox, had a very specific insight about what all of them were missing. His insight was that basically their UI sucked. And the reason their UI sucked was that at the time, the way that they all worked is you had to go to their website and manually upload your files one at a time into their website, which sucked, of course. And Drew had really a technical insight, which was that if he integrated directly into the host operating system, he could just sync your files automatically without you having to do anything. And that was a real step function change in how convenient these services were to use, and that was the right insight. Okay, let's talk about how to come up with startup ideas. So, it is possible to sit down and explicitly think of startup ideas. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about how to do this. But it is actually not the best way. The best way to have startup ideas is to just notice them organically. And if you look at the YC Top 100 companies, at least 70% of them had their startup ideas organically, rather than by sitting down and explicitly trying to think of a startup idea. And the problem is that when people sit down and try to think of startup ideas, they tend to think of bad ones. They're especially likely to think of the same set of tar pit ideas that I talked about earlier. Whereas startup ideas that occur to you organically are more likely to be good ones. So if you're not planning on starting a company imminently and you just want to put yourself in a position to have organic startup ideas in the future, here are 3 ways to do that. This is like playing the long game to set yourself up for future success. First is just become an expert on something valuable. If you're working at the forefront of some field, you'll see good startup ideas in that field. And a great way to do that is to go work at a startup. Harj talked about this in his talk last week. If you're working at a startup, you will become an expert in the thing that startup does. And that is really putting yourself in a position to have great startup ideas. And finally, if you're a programmer, one thing that can work is to just build things that you find interesting. Even if they're not businesses, they're not clearly startup ideas, sometimes they turn into them over time. And a really striking example of this is the story of Replit. This is exactly how Replit got started. It was just something that Amjad found interesting. It wasn't supposed to be a startup originally. Okay, but if you want to generate ideas for startups right now, I'm going to walk through 7 recipes for doing that. I've tried to list these in order of how likely they are to lead to actually good ideas. So start with the first ones. Okay, here's the first one and the best one. Start with what your team is especially good at, and think of ideas that take advantage of your expertise. The reason that this is so effective is that any idea you come up with this way has automatic founder market fit. Do you see how this is almost like a hack to generate the set of ideas that has founder market fit? Here's a great example of how this worked in practice. So a good example is this company Resi, which is Opendoor for rental apartments. And before starting Resi, the founders had worked in real estate and debt financing, and they were experts in those areas. And when they got into YC, they spent the first month looking for ideas. But the smart thing that they did is they only looked at ideas in that idea space, in the rough idea space at the intersection of real estate and fintech. And that was a smart move because that is a very fertile idea space for startups. Many billion-dollar companies have come out of that idea space, and the Resi founders were experts in that idea space. And so because of that, their search for a startup idea was pretty quick and painless, and pretty quickly they came up with the idea for Resi, which is an excellent idea and has perfect founder market fit. So if you have specific expertise like the Resi founders did, you should definitely start by looking at ideas in the things that you're experts in. It is weird how many startups apply to YC, and we look at their applications and the founders are actually legitimate experts in something, but the idea that they're applying with is something completely different. Now, if you're a young founder, if you're in college or something, you may not have had a chance to develop the level of domain expertise that the Resi founders had. So this may not be the right recipe for you. So let's talk about some other ones. The next recipe is to start with a problem you've personally encountered, ideally one that you're in an unusual position to see. So VetCove is a website for veterinarians to order supplies. So you can think about it like Amazon.com for vets. And the short story of VetCove is that the founders are brothers, and their dad is a veterinarian. And growing up, they would notice that the way he ordered supplies was super old-fashioned. You'd have to call up a supplier on the phone and order stuff through a 1-800 number or something. It was very obvious that you could build an Amazon.com kind of thing that would replace that. And I love the story of VetCove because it's such a great example of what a great startup opportunity looks like. Because thousands of veterinarians must have known that this was a real problem, that it was really annoying that there wasn't like a basic website where you could just go to order supplies. But the thing is, veterinarians don't start tech startups very often. And then on the other hand, you had like thousands of programmers in Silicon Valley who were banging their heads against CISPs and TARPIT ideas, totally unaware that over here there was like a really great, genuine problem to work on.